to Cutting Through with me, Natasha Plowman. Now, this is a bit of a treat of a episode this time, is because from coming behind the scenes to front of the scenes is Neil Kleiner. So Neil and I have been working together on all things cutting through since he gave me the idea of starting this podcast when I turned 50. Not that long ago, but long enough ago to see that I've gotten to three seasons. But I really wanted to have this conversation with Neil, particularly in our theme for season three, which is how to cut through with humanity in the age of AI. Because Neil's been working within social media for decades. He's seen it from MySpace through to TikTok now. He's worked with big brands, small brands, and brands that have always wanted. The fundamental is to cut through and to, have resonance with their audience, not just fill feeds. However, what we know with social media now is we've got AI slop, we've got filling of feeds of just crap that is not actually helping brands and helping humanity in the same way. So I thought this would be a really cool conversation to kind of look back in the past a bit, but also how does that past shape a future that we can hopefully do something differently. So Neil, you're front of the camera now rather than, having all powerful behind the scenes.
About
Introduce
bloody time,
yourself.
Pat. About bloody time. Um, Hello, I'm Neil Kleiner. I have been specializing, I guess, in social media marketing and influencer marketing for 25 years. As Tash said, the first projects I worked on were on MySpace. When the job of social media marketing was very different to what it is now. Back then, it was building communities. It was finding what people loved and making them feel closer to it, and then encouraging them to participate and take part. And also kind of influence the direction of that community. It's a very different world now. There are pockets of community that still exist, um, but predominantly it is far more about broadcast and consumption than it is about community, which I think requires a very different kind of skill set and also a different economic model for brands. They have to produce content at such unprecedented scales that the remuneration models with agencies are now inefficient as well. So yeah, social media is the journey of social media is one that's mirrored my own career journey. Um, and now I've taken a semi-enforced career break, semi-enforced, and to keep myself busy as well as consultancy. I've been working on some personal projects, convincing my friends to launch podcasts, and then and
And
then
very well done for that, by the way.
producing those podcasts,
Yes.
as well as Antiquoted, which maybe
Yeah,
we'll get to as well. The sponsor of Cutting Through season three.
this is true. This is true. So, you touched a bit on, I think the crux of the real problem we've got with social media, and I'm going to include social media in the kind of and use of AI tools in a lot of way, because a lot of the way that people are using a lot of AI tools is to more rapidly and more just create more stuff and
Yeah.
create more content and create more visual and audio and every type of content, of which this podcast is also another example. But it's that whole element of where's the influence of money in this? And you touched on the agency models, but also you touched on the role that brands need to be playing in getting that cut through, but also being able to get the return on investment they want from social media. Because it just feels like when you're talking about community and getting people together, it seems that's what everyone craves, but we're just not able to do effectively. So, and I think that often comes from it becomes a monetary conversation rather than something that's more about building connection and building bridges.
Look, I think there's a lot to touch on there. Let's start with community. Community exists more. It's more prevalent than ever. All right. Anyone that has a WhatsApp group chat with their friends, that's community. Anyone that has a street WhatsApp community,
Mm.
um, same thing.
Or these
Fortnite,
big, massive industry communities on WhatsApp groups, which
yeah.
say they have like 1,000 people and claim size, when the
Hmm.
reality of it, it's kind of a handful of people generally pontificating and peacocking about their own viewpoints and views rather than actual community. But I digress. Go
I
on.
think that's just I think that's just our industry, Tash,
I
to be
think you
honest.
might, I think you might be
Attracts a
right
certain
there.
type of person. Um, look, I think community still exists and is growing more than ever. And I think that smart brands are ones that are investing in comparatively micro niche communities. I think social media um, was the first time we could publish constantly, react instantly, and have reach huge audiences without traditional kind of gatekeepers. And our industry learned to optimize, but we optimized the wrong things. We got very good at metrics, engagement, reach, clicks, but we didn't get much better at making things that people genuinely care about because we were so obsessed with scale,
Yeah,
right? And not really meaning. Um, AI has kind of removed that last bit of friction, as you kind of hinted. AI takes that same system where we can respond instantly to millions of people and makes it even faster and even easier. Instead of trying to fix that kind of underlying problem of scale versus meaning, we're actually accelerating that division. We've already seen what happens when you prioritize speed, scale, and optimization over meaning, and AI is just going to amplify that unless we consciously do something about it.
yeah.
I've been in this industry long enough to know that we're in this perpetual pendulum swing from one thing to another. So now everything is about efficiency, right? That's the prevailing wind. Efficiency, scale, AI systems that help us do more, quicker, faster. And I feel there's now this sort of growing uh, need for brands to actually think, well, let's not do big.
Yeah.
Let's find small, let's find meaning, let's have communities that actually we can actually talk to.
Yeah.
We can actually have a brilliant two-way conversation with, instead of essentially treating, the cliche of social media was it's this great global conversation, this great town square. Now we know that isn't the case, but the scale of it was what attracted media owners and what attracted brands. We can reach millions of people. But what are we doing with that privilege?
Yeah.
Are we just pushing more and more meaningless content because it's so easy for us to do, and some of it's going to land right,
Mm.
versus actually really focusing on a smaller group of people that we can have meaningful conversations with?
And it's that whole scattergun approach. I mean, it seems to be pervasive from media relations and kind of traditional PR, which, part of that was media relations, which is then merged into social media. And it's just continually about a scattergun approach. And when we actually talk about the metrics and we actually talk about the strategy and we have a strategic conversation about what do we want to influence and why, sometimes media relations is a useful tool. Sometimes social media is a useful tool, but it needs to be in the right mix and the right order. And, around what the audience wants to hear from you. And what seems to be coming up so much more in the conversations I'm having around this topic is, have we lost sense of the real strategic outcomes that we want to affect change or influence attitudes or behavior with our
It,
core audiences? Or are we there chasing, and we, like you said, we're chasing big numbers that are meaningless.
so
So
far,
what's
at
the
the
shift?
moment, at the moment, the strategy is volume.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. That's the
And it's still,
strategy.
and we
Volume.
know that this doesn't work, and we know that this doesn't relate to people, and they just scroll on by. So, what's
Mhm.
going to be the catalyst, do you think, that's actually going to get people to kind of take a step back and realize that they need to have a more strategic conversation and understanding of the audiences they're trying to influence and why?
It's just not working.
Okay.
Like it's simply not working. We have already, over the last few years, this is the first 18 to 24 months where social media has a growth engagement in this country and many others has stopped being this hockey stick growth.
Yeah.
plateauing and it is declining, right? And part of that is because, again, we're just polluting these platforms with more and more shit.
Yeah.
You know, AI has removed the friction in strategic decisions, and the friction is often where thinking happens. It's where you pause and when you ask, is this actually good? Is this working? Easy to make doesn't mean it's worth making.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel that in terms of where it's going to be. Look, I've often talked about this idea that we're in this, and not just social media, in every form of marketing communications, we are in firmly this era of pervasive mediocrity, right?
Mm.
And there's many reasons for that. One, because no one wants to get fired.
Yep. And particularly in the
Agencies,
current climate,
yeah,
it's scary, the market. And it's just,
definitely.
and so therefore people just keep on doing the same old thing that they think will get them to where they need to get to.
I think 7 out of 10 is fine for a lot of people. It's not
Mm.
shit. It's not great. It won't get us fired. It will work just enough, rather than certainly, I feel such a privilege to have grown up in this industry at an age where there were big swings,
Mm.
Sometimes it didn't work, but when it did, it really, really worked. And it feels at the moment, particularly with social media, but I think also with many other forms of marketing communications, we're just happy for okay because we don't want to upset or ruffle any feathers.
And I think, but is this also something to do with around that fear? Fear of
Yep.
getting it wrong, fear of because, and it seems to be this double bind of, because social media gives people a platform, because it enables scale of outrage, of fear, of
Mm.
anger, that, people just keep with just below the radar, not to be able to kind of offend people, but then
Mm.
also what does offense look like for different people is fundamentally different.
Yep.
But then again we go back to, if you know your target market and you know your target audience and you know what resonates and lands, but then why are we constantly in this kind of just good enough? But then also, or we've gone just good enough, or we've gone to just full on kind of rage inducing
Yep.
content to then get visibility and clicks and scales. But do we
Yep.
actually have the return on investment of it? And I think it just seems to be all these different pockets of different things are making us just, lose sight of what actually these platforms were built to do,
Yeah.
which they
They were
just don't
built
do.
to entertain. They were built to grab attention. They were built to inspire. They were built to ask questions,
Mm,
not state answers. And I think a lot of the time, social content is all just about statements and answers. Here is the question, and we're going to answer it for you.
mm,
Whereas social media, a lot of the times, was the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. Look, I'll give you an example. I'm going to mention for the first time a very controversial word on cutting through. I'm going to mention the word Palestine,
mhm.
right? Dun, dun, dun. So a really lovely or awful example. A brand that I won't mention produced a TV ad, and above the fireplace of the scene of the TV ad were candles that were green, red, and black. The social response to that was, "How dare you produce content that is directly showing that you are supporting Israel and not supporting Palestine?" And that became a huge, just because of the color of the fucking candles, right? Um, so yeah, you're right. People are scared of offending different groups. People are scared of getting it wrong. People are scared of being fired. Agencies don't want to lose
Yep.
accounts, so they don't
Yeah.
want to push for more powerful work. And certainly clients want to perhaps, and they always have done, bless them, perhaps take a great idea and during the process of winning the pitch to execution, of course, there is an
Yeah.
element of dilution as it goes through more and more elements of feedback. That's why we've always started with bigger, bolder ideas, knowing that they perhaps get diluted. Yeah, there is, it's a really um, strange world to be a creative at the moment. unless you're independent and it's your own creativity. But if you are championing and protecting and producing creative ideas that that if that goes wrong, it has an impact on people paying their mortgage, then 7 out of 10 is fine.
Yeah. And I think, but it's also alongside this, we went through years of brands having a point of view, being seen to have be a force for good, recognizing that the role they need to play in society, and part of that was kind of culture and part and environmental, so part of the ESG conversation,
Oh yeah.
and that also became part of geopolitics and interests around different geopolitical issues. And what we saw, particularly after October 7, when you had the massacre of people in Israel and also the hostage taking, was that, this was a geopolitical issue that people weren't comfortable talking about. And you compare that to the response was to the Russian invasion of Ukraine,
Mm.
where, it was very much frowned upon if your business was still operating within Russia.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was kind of, um, you know, useful for some businesses to be able to use that as an example to withdraw from a market that wasn't effective for them. But what we're seeing is, and I mean, one thing I've really rethought is the whole notion of business as a force for good. Business is there to make money.
Yeah.
Business is there to be a market mover, to make money for, shareholders, but also to make money for employees, to make, to make money. And sometimes, you don't need to have an opinion or viewpoint on everything and everyone. And
Mm.
also, you don't need that opinion to necessarily be public. It can be something that guides
Mm.
decision making around your supply chain, around your actions and everything. But then there's this change around people are expecting you to have a view, and it's not going to be a view that's valid for everyone.
Yeah.
And this whole division that social media seems to have been that presiding over is businesses have been caught up in it, and now they've gone to the other extreme of not saying anything. And actually, I'm kind of a viewpoint now that that's probably okay.
Yeah.
I don't think businesses should be having a viewpoint on particular parts of geopolitical conversation,
I mean,
but that
silence is not complicity in this case.
and sometimes it's not, but also it's also a recognition of, where do you have the greatest impact? Where do you have, and this is where supply chain conversations become much more important because it's specific to that business around what's happening geopolitically and the stability that business wants from a global world that doesn't also exist anymore. That means
Yeah.
that we can actually have a better conversation. And I think, and then coming back to the parallels of the growth of social media, the growth of everyone having a voice, the growth of everyone can be an influencer, the growth of citizen journalism has also coincided with the growth of rage, outrage,
Yeah.
fear, and an inability to listen to anyone else, an
Mm.
inability to actually carry different truths at the same time and recognize that's fine. And for me, that's the fundamental when we talk about how do we cut through with humanity in the age of AI, is the ability to hold multiple truths and the ability to be able to recognize that, people come at things from different perspectives, and that's
Mm.
fine.
Yeah.
So where do
As
we
it
go from here?
as it should be. Look, I think in the early days of social media, and I promised myself I wouldn't sound like some sort of aging marketer going, well, back in my day, but back in my
My
day,
day.
um, I think social media was particularly confusing for brands. Suddenly it wasn't just broadcast. Your customers, needed to be friends with a packet of crisps or a detergent or yeah. Um, and the powerful thing about social media versus TV advertising. TV advertising is 30 seconds TV spot, right? Social media is what happens after that 30 seconds. It's the conversation that follows. And we saw lots of brands in the early days try and be kind of reactive into culture. You know, I've worked on many a brand who, um, okay, one in particular, a QSR fast food chain, shall we say, reacting to the Queen passing away.
Mm,
And having a real like 3 or 4 days debate about what we should do,
yeah.
uh, and I just feel if it takes that long, it's probably the wrong thing to do,
No,
you know?
but it is, we've lost that kind of, I mean, you and I both grew up where instinctiveness and that kind of that gut feeling and that ability to kind of be on the pulse of where you think your audiences need to hear from you seems to have been lost as it's all been around kind of almost like anonymized metrics that don't actually get that real human response to things. And
Mm,
humans, this is what I like about humanity, and this is what I like about humans, is we're complex, we're messy, we change our mind, and we kind of, and things aren't all nice and ordered. And therefore our reactions can be almost imagined, but then they'll surprise you. And how
mm,
people will react as well. But
yeah.
you're right, that kind of that because when things take too long and decision making is going around in circles, part of it might be listening to different divergent viewpoints. We
Mm,
wish. Part of it might be just fear of doing something wrong because we're in an environment that, everyone wants to drag you down if they perceive you've done something wrong. So it is that kind of, so how do you so that bravery of just
mm,
making a decision and going with it and recognizing it might actually blow back, but it also might really work,
yeah.
is something that we've lost sight of a little bit as we've just gone into this world of just stuff being shared.
I think at the moment everyone is kind of outsourcing their judgment,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I love that. Another
Everyone is
Neil classic of kind of outsourcing your judgment. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
everyone is just like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm scared we might get it wrong. What do you think? And then someone goes, thank you for giving me that hot potato.
Yeah.
I don't know what to think either. I'll ask someone else. Or we're asking AI.
Oh, this is it. All we're asking AI. The amount of times you're in a conversation and things are, well, ChatGPT said this, or Claude
Yeah.
said this, or whatever AI tool that you've got. And then it's kind of almost, well, they've said it, and they've kind of, and then we can go into the whole conversation around the baked in bias that you've got within these systems, and they kind of to become an almost source of truth.
Yeah.
And, human judgment and that complexity. And I remember in the first episode of this season, when we were talking to Athena Pepes, and she was talking about that contextualization of multiple truths is a human skill that we shouldn't be relying on different
Yeah.
AI tools to have. But we also need to go back into understanding ourselves, understanding our triggers, understanding why we feel certain responses to things, and therefore being able to contextualize that response to be able to then extrapolate to other people when we're making decisions.
Yeah. I think w- your question, although we've been very chatty, but your initial question was what can we do about it? And I feel that ultimately, and this is another thing that we've talked about quite often, I think the other major factor in terms of the inefficiency and the mediocrity is the fact that we are living in this plurality of reality,
Yeah,
which means that every single person's view of social media and therefore the news agenda and therefore the world is different.
yeah,
It's not even tribes anymore. It's not even subcultures. It's every single person has a different view on these things. So it means that if that you don't have a foothold or a handhold on the
mm,
world.
no,
You know, you might come in with your perspective on how things might work in terms of a piece of creative or a piece of content. Um, but you might be completely different versus the other people in the room. You
yeah,
know, it might be a completely different sense of perspective. So, what do you do, Tash? Well, I don't know. But what I do know is the more that people can be in the same room as other people,
yeah,
the more people can meet up in real life and have conversations, the more that you get off your bum and go to networking events or conferences and speak to people, you would be surprised how comforting that is. And you know, I say that as well in an era that, you know, we lost that power during COVID. We
Yeah.
lost the power to go out and speak to people. We lost the power of going to the pub after work, after a pitch. Um, you know, being in the office all together. Don't get me wrong, I like my flexibility, but I also love working with people in the same
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
So,
But also it's there's different. I mean, I've worked in global companies. I think people can build connection online as much as they can build connection in real life. But sometimes it's the conversations you don't expect to have. It's the openness to just listening to someone who might challenge your viewpoint or might just give you a different perspective that you never had.
mm,
And, I mean, I travel quite a lot with work, and so I'm often in airline queues. And I just started chatting to this guy who's a filmmaker, and he's kind of worked on different really interesting environmental projects and worked on interesting, and like some of the people he's worked with, I don't necessarily agree with on certain issues, but I can respect their right to have that viewpoint and to be able to talk about it. And I think this is the thing that I would like to see when we have those conversations is just to kind of when someone is affecting how you feel about things. And it could then, that rests with you and
mm,
your knowledge around why you've got that particular viewpoint or why that's affecting you or why that's triggering you, not to then silence someone else. And I think this town square that we talked about around the rise of social media has almost to your point, has just become everyone in their little lanes. Never shall they cross over and merge together for
mm,
fear of, being, agreeing with someone who you might not agree with on something else. And I think
mm.
so, yes, it is chatting to more people, opening up those conversations. Yes, it's listening to different viewpoints and recognizing when you're feeling that their viewpoint might challenge your own perspective and just to sit with that and
Yeah,
understand it and have that self-reflection. And it's fine not to agree with people. It's not fine to then say, without listening and without understanding, without entering into dialogue, just to silence that. And
indeed.
that's what we're seeing. And then when you overlay that with a system that just kind of draws on particular sources without that divergent thinking and ideas, then we know we're in a situation we're in now. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, and that makes it really difficult bringing it back around. Look at that. I'm so professional. Bringing it back around to social media.
yeah,
Um, if you are a community manager thinking, what the fuck do I post today? Um, it's really tricky. Like if your audience is not one audience, I mean, it is one audience, but within that are multitudes of different perspectives, political opinions, you know, impotent rage to, you know, outrageous support and love, all side by side and mixed in, you know, and you're trying to put together a post that engages everyone. It's tricky, you
yeah,
know? You know, the real power of community managers, which by the way are the biggest unsung
yeah,
kind of heroes in marketing, was they had to think about words that would engage, meaningfully engage a community of people, and try and find something which is a common connective thread, which basically brings everyone together in engagement via agreement or even disengagement.
yeah.
But sorry, disagreement, not disengagement. Maybe
But
both.
it's a bit of disengagement. I mean, like
Yeah.
one of the kind of the communities I run, someone was questioning why are these people leaving? And there wasn't that many in the grand scheme of things, but why are people leaving and being disengaged? And I think it's fine to accept that people in different viewpoints and people will disengage and people will engage. And that's
Mm,
all. But again, we go even further back to the metrics.
mm,
If we start measuring the wrong things, be it reach, and these big numbers that don't actually have any meaning to them, and then we're not actually targeting the right people, the right content, and the right strategy for that particular
yeah.
brand, issue, or topic, or individual. So, we need to go back to the strategic conversations that we're having and put humans at the center of what we're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think with that, looking at time, I think with that strategic thing is it's not big gestures,
No.
I think it's small decisions. It's not publishing something just because you can or
Yes.
because it's Tuesday and we have to post every day. It's taking a bit more time to get tone right,
Yeah.
just really work hard on being genuine and human and learning that a person that letting a person kind of respond instead of kind of automating everything,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think it's my practical
Yeah.
guide.
And again, just because you can doesn't mean you should with all the different tools and ideas. And none of this series is about that but we should not use different tools but it's being really purposeful and intentional about
Mm.
what we're trying to achieve and to who.
Yeah.
So, go back to the basics of your strategy of what do you want to influence? What do people know, think, and feel and do now? And what do you want to influence them to do something differently or feel something differently? Neil, great conversation. We traversed some interesting topics. And some we went into depth, and some we kind of just stayed on the outskirts of that. Hopefully, we'll finish this conversation and ignite a bit of a conversation with other people on, one is let's look at how social media has developed and changed. Let's look at what it's influenced and what it hasn't influenced. And let's start making more intentional choices around how do we, as the human race and as practitioners in this marketing and comms field, can actually influence more effective change into the future. Thank you for being on Cutting Through. I look forward to seeing what you edit this topic to be like as well, because
Yeah, I'll get on that right now.
I'm nothing if not a whip. Lovely to have you on Cutting Through, and I look forward
Thanks.
to the conversation we have after the fact.